So first of all, I just want to thank everyone again for coming today. I know we have people from all over the city, all over the country, and all over the world who've been participating in Industrial Philanthropy Week for the past 7 years. Some are new, some have been with us for many, many years. And it's just a real honor for us to have conversations throughout the week on giving. And really, the point of these conversations is less about how much you give, but more how can what you're doing today create greater impact on the numerous millions, if not hundreds of millions of lives that we need to uplift. And so first of all, I just wanted to thank all of you guys for being here, listening so patiently, and being more active with your questions and answers. We do have a few new faces in the room, which is always great. And so I'm going to go with a little bit of the history of Dasra, because I don't know if everyone knows it or not. And for those of you who've been with us for a while, I apologize. But to begin with, Dasra was founded in 1999. My wife, Neera, and I used to work at Morgan Stanley. And we realized that the amount of rigor and discipline and analytical data to drive funding in for-profit investments and then support those entrepreneurs to grow and scale, that same rigor and discipline was not necessarily used in the nonprofit sector. And I guess the both of us and now a large team that we have at Dasra, and many of you in the room realize that that discipline at times perhaps is greater utilized when you're lifting 800 million people out of poverty than perhaps making the rich richer. And so for us, I think that's allowed us to sort of create this organization. We're very, very fortunate to have a young and dynamic team that work with us here in Mumbai. We have somebody who works with us in New York, Radhika Nair, and we're recently, in fact, having a colleague of ours, Vishal Kapoor, who many of the Giving Circle members know, who's been with us for 6 years, is going to help us open up a San Francisco presence now in a couple of months. And this is through a partnership we have with Bridgespan. Rohit was a moderator on stage, and they're just a fantastic organization that's been working and changing the face of philanthropy and development in the US for a number of years. Bridgespan has recently opened an office here in conjunction with Bain & Company, and they've been so gracious to be hosting our colleagues in the US, both in New York as well as in San Francisco going forward. And the reason we're sort of growing at this rapid pace, I think, from my perspective and Neera's perspective, is this realization that our initial vision of providing funding and managerial support to help NGOs scale, while that's still very true to our model, over time we've realized that philanthropists need the same level of support and guidance. And this may seem odd. Yesterday, in fact, we were blessed to have 40 leading foundations from across the country and some global players come together and spend a full day with us trying to figure out how foundations can work closer together. And surprisingly, comments across the table were that even being a foundation head is fairly lonely. And are there communities or safe spaces for these foundation heads to come together and share their insights, talk about some of the issues that they're seeing every single day, and honestly be more open about the mistakes they've made and perhaps even the criteria of funds that they use. They may not be able to fund everything, so how do they create greater collaboration at a foundation level? So it's not saying a yes or no to an organization that's well deserved in terms of capital requirements, but more passing them on to a funder who's better equipped to make those investments. And so for us, to begin with, we've been very fortunate in 2009, after spending about a decade in working with social entrepreneurs over on the ground and sharing some of those insights through forums like this, we started something called the Dasra Giving Circle, which many of you may have seen videos of earlier today. And to begin with, I just would love for the Dasra Giving Circle members, if you can, please stand up, because I think I want to talk a little bit about the experiences we've had with you guys and how we've learned through the journey so far with you guys. So if the DGC members could stand up, I'd really appreciate that. And so these are individuals that have come together to give in a collaborative manner. And what we've realized over time was while they funded few circles, such as the speaker that we had earlier today, Sridhar, talking about how he's been joining multiple circles, we've also seen what's been unique about this particular movement, I would say, with 105 members across the globe, is that philanthropy has actually meant much more than just writing the check. it's actually brought some of these families closer together. And so we see conversations and hear conversations of husband and wives, for example, talking about philanthropy and choosing different organizations because of their different perspectives on how they see the problem. We've seen children working with their parents more effectively around philanthropy, given that they may or may not have a role in the family business going forward, but they still see that philanthropy is the glue that sort of brings them together. And we've seen brothers and sisters coming together and joining Thusra Giving Circles across the globe as a way to actually build something which is much more meaningful than perhaps what they currently talk about. But again, it's built on uplifting some of the most deprived communities in our country in a more effective manner. And so for us, while we've been working with the Thusra Giving Circles for, like I said, since 2009, so for many years now, we realized that these families perhaps needed more than just the Thusra Giving Circle. They had aspirations of giving beyond what Thusra has been able to provide them so far. Many of them have been talking to us about legacy, and areas where in their will they'd like to give X amount away, and they want to see how their family or others can actually become trustees of this movement, enabling the movement and the legacy of their family to continue far beyond their passing. And it was through conversations like this, I think, we began to focus a little bit more on family philanthropy. That may seem a little bit odd, but we realized that families in general, both in this country and others, philanthropy is actually a large part of what builds and binds them together in the future, especially those that are encompassed or part of a family business. And that's, again, where I think the story of Neer and I come back, is because, for lack of a better word, we are a family business. It's a husband and wife team. We started this on our own. We have, of course, 100 staff members now that do phenomenal work, but it's really run like a family. And I think for the nonprofits that we support, to the funders in our Thusra Giving Circles, to groups like you see the logos on stage, for us it's really been having that family approach and bringing everyone together. And we say all the time that once you're part of the Thusra family, you can never leave, kind of like the mafia. But for us, it was, how do you then take that to the next level? How do you actually engage with the people that we're currently working with and a new group of individuals in this country that want to make giving more part of their lives? And how do you provide services to them to be more effective? And so this past year, for the first time ever, we launched a family philanthropy education program, where we have 8 cousins coming together. And they've been meeting over 27 speakers, NGO site visits, individuals like Anuaga, Louis Miranda, and others talking about their forms of giving. We've done Aspen Institute readings about moral compass, and it was shocking that even in this particular family that's very, very close in nature, it was the first time they were opening up as a group of cousins on what they saw in terms of where society needs to go today and how there were differences in their approaches. We've also had some good learning journeys with them, visiting organizations like Sneha or Prerna, going to the red light district, and again, seeing the phenomenal work that Priti Patkar and Praveen Patkar do in terms of stopping second-generation sex trafficking in our country. And through these efforts, we've also been very, very blessed to have Peggy Dulaney Rockefeller talk about the burden of being a Rockefeller or being in some of these large families. She spoke very openly to the group that it was until she was 30 to 40 years old that she was actually comfortable with the family name that she had been brought up with. And it was at the age of 18, actually, after spending time in slums of Brazil, she dropped the Rockefeller name because that burden was just too high for her to keep. And so for us, we realized family giving is much more than just writing the checks. It's about bringing people together, it's about building communities, and it's about creating legacies for you and your children for the generations to come. And that's really what the conversation for the next 15 to 20 minutes is about on our side, which is, how is Thusra going to look at family giving more effectively? And in doing so, like any other smart entrepreneurs would, Neer and I started looking at different options of partnership, because we realized you can't do things alone. And in that process, we were fortunate to speak to individuals who we've known for a very, very long time, a group that was spoken quite a bit about in the last panel, Give India, and Venkat Krishnan, who we have a significant amount of admiration for and with, and decided that, is there ways that Thusra and Give India can work together, because we talk about partnerships and collaboration. And like Rohini said earlier today, it's not about forcing collaborations or collaborating for the sake of collaborating, but how do you really build partnerships that create the 1 + 1 = 11? And so for the first time in Dasra and Give India's journey, while we've worked together closely side by side for a number of years, we've decided to take it a step further. And to make this announcement, I'd love to now call the two board members, one from Give India, Amit Chandra, and Tarun Jotwani, to the stage to talk a little bit about what this partnership means between Give India and Dasra, and more importantly, how we can then start supporting all of the families in this room and hopefully a larger amount of families across the country more effectively. And so the great thing, I think, about this sector, and you heard Vineeth Rai and myself speaking earlier today, and the three of us, Venkat, Vineeth, and myself, were on the steering committee for the MacArthur report that was just recently launched. One of the great things is we all work in different places, yet we are able to see the same trends. And so when Dasra started thinking about looking at the family business side of things and family giving in general and how we provide better support for them, lo and behold, Amit Chandra, who's a board member of Give India, and his team there were actually having similar conversations. And they actually engaged a group called McKinsey to actually help them think through this strategy. So my first question to you, Amit, is, about a year ago, when Give India was at this stage, what were some of your thoughts? What were some of the findings that McKinsey was able to provide you? And what, I guess, led you guys to think that, again, doing it together was more impactful?
Thank you, Deval. Pleasure to be here. Give India as an organization has been at the forefront of trying to build the philanthropic movement in the country. And by all metrics, if you look at the graph of the number of donors we've engaged with and the amount of funds channelized to the social sector, you can have a deep sense of satisfaction at the board level with what has been achieved in a 10, 15-year journey. But for a long period of time, actually, there was a deep sense of dissatisfaction amongst all of us in the board that we weren't really moving the needle. That you could look at all the numbers and feel proud of everything that has been accomplished, but just the scale of the problems that we were dealing with meant that we had to be far, far more creative in taking our efforts to a very, very different level. And that set us on a period of introspection where we asked ourselves, what would it take to not grow linearly at 30, 40% a year, which is what we've been growing at, but exponentially. How is it that we could be 100x in 3 years or 5 years? Because that's what you really need to get to the tipping point where most Indians are involved with, engaged with our social problems. We realized two things, actually. One is that Give India was engaged with both mass giving, which is small donors, and high net worth giving with families and professionals. We realized those two things required very different skills, and probably should exist in two different organizations. And so we, fortunately, the board and the team was quite open-minded, and we said we could do things differently and actually split Give India into two different organizations which would go out and accomplish the goal to get to a very different level over time. We then engaged with McKinsey to really challenge our thinking and figure out how we could really get to 100x on the high net worth giving. We felt the time had come. We had seeded a group led by a wonderful lady in the audience, Deepa Vardarajan, who is a semiconductor engineer from the US, who came back to India and actually started our high net worth giving initiative. And we built a wonderful team that works with her. And we said, okay, how can we really build around this to engage with 100 families in 2 or 3 years, 1,000 families in 3 to 5 years, and really get them to be a lot more strategic India giving. And McKinsey helped us kind of go through that process. In that process, we realized that there was the opportunity to be collaborative about it, and we should not take anything off the table. And very soon, we actually came to the conclusion that it made sense to align with the one other group that was trying to do something very similar, which was Dasra. It also so happened that while we were looking for a CEO, every headhunter told us that the best guy was the guy on my right. And so we figured, the best way to acquire him was to merge our high net worth business with Dasra and have him lead it. But the last 3 or 4 months where we really accelerated upon this idea, we just realized that it just made so much more sense to do it together. All of us, fortunately, in the team as well as at the board, were very clearly end objective focused. This wasn't about the typical egos that come in way when you do M&A in the other half of the world I exist in, which is private equity and banking. We were very end objective focused that we wanted to get to a very different point, and it didn't matter if we got there with a joint identity than with a sole identity. And that got us onto this journey, which I'm really happy to say has resulted in combining the two groups under Dasra today.
Great, thank you, Amit. Tarun, my question, I guess, to you is, and I know yesterday, in fact, at a gathering, we had one of your family friends there who was talking about family giving themselves and some of the questions that they had around this. And so I guess my question to you is two-part. Number one, what skills do you think that Dasra has? You've been our chairman for many, many years now. What skills do you think we have currently today that we can bring to the table, number one? And I think number two, what are some of the things that you've heard in passing or even in your own personal journey in philanthropy that you think this initiative can help sort of accelerate in terms of creating impact?
Thanks. And by the way, the headhunter call into they will did create some bedroom problems with Neera. But until this merger became apparent. To answer the first question, when I just a few years ago, 5 years ago, Dasra was a very different outfit, some of you might know, and I think Dasra at that time was what they do today very similarly. They were thinking about impact. They were looking at scaling. And they were looking at measurement of that scale, and they were looking at impact at scale. But they were looking at individual NGOs on the ground, and then working with those NGOs. They were also, when the funding came in for a particular mission, they would then focus their efforts, their research, their DSI efforts, and the due diligence efforts based on what that funding from that philanthropist or foundation wanted. And I think the aha moment came when, over the years, they had built up various NGOs, they had scaled, they had in their portfolio a bunch of NGOs, social enterprises that were doing a lot of, that were basically doing a lot of work with adolescent girls. And that was the aha moment, gosh, we can create a Dasra alliance. And that in fact, we should not really go where all our funders want us to go. We really need to build expertise in certain sectors, in certain services. Thus, the formation of Dasra Girls Alliance a few years ago, 3 years ago. And thus, the focus on ecosystems. And all of a sudden, the thought was ecosystems. We can therefore build different ecosystems by bringing different NGOs, different social enterprises on the ground together, because that's really the only way to work. And that aha moment, therefore, started to bring in a lot of funds from professional institutions, from foundations who believed in this collaborative giving and in building ecosystems, which is really the only way. And then they went into sanitation and governance. However, as Dasra has grown, there's been a bit of a limitation. And that limitation, that awareness of that limitation has been that we only look at it from the social enterprise lens. What about the giver's lens? What about the family lens? What about the philanthropist lens? And that has been that recently has become self-evident that that's a bit of a shortcoming. So in the last 12 months, as Dasra's breadth has spread in India, in the world, a lot of the incoming inquiries for funding for Dasra, we haven't been able to fulfill because the aspirations of the funders, the aspirations of the givers has been different than our core ecosystems that we concentrate on today. And so what Give India will allow us to do is focus on the givers, from the giver's lens, and then bring those two together. And the result will be, we believe, will be pretty powerful because we can tailor make the giving. We can talk to the giver about what their aspirations are, what the family aspirations are, and then direct the funding to fulfill those aspirations over time, not only within Dasra's sectors, not only within the ecosystems that Dasra has built, but away from Dasra as well. So that really then broadens Dasra's involvement. And Dasra has built a fantastic research function, a fantastic due diligence functions. And so the idea would be to take some of those resources and apply it to non-Dasra sectors in order to fulfill the Give India mission, which is bring funding in from the family lens or from the giver's lens. In answer to your second question, I've had a couple of recent family situations, and in a way to each their own. One family, one relative in Delhi they've put aside money in a foundation for giving. And this is, again, a traditional family, but this is the next gen that's putting money away in a foundation. And their decision after a year of thinking about this has been to establish a school for special learning, a school to take autistic kids and other special learning needs in the poorer parts of Delhi. But they had the resources to build it on their own. They had the resources to work with Tata Power. Tata Power gave them land. They had extra land. They gave them buildings. And they're on their way to bring in professionals to actually scale this by themselves. So that's theirs. They want to build their own NGO to do this. Perhaps they don't need Dasra Give India today, but as they grow, they may have the need for other NGOs, for other collaborative efforts. The other family situation is a recent one where the next gen has inherited, on the instructions of their father, 5 crores into a foundation for giving. And now the question is, everybody's busy, what do they do? And that question today is unanswered. Should they develop something on their own? Should they work with an organization like Dasra and Give India to actually understand how to make maximum impact? There are contradictions along the way. They have to figure out what their father's wishes were, what their common needs are, and they need someone to help them think it through. Should they distribute the money over a short period of time, or should they actually hold on to it for a longer period of time and supplement that with their own next-gen money, and should their family be involved or not? And I think there are a lot of families like this who really need that help, and I don't think we have that here. And Dasra, Give India, together, the merger, we hope then solves that problem. I think we hope that the result of this merger unlocks a lot of philanthropic capital.
Great, thank you, Amit and Tarun. And before I open it up for questions, I think as we, for example, just yesterday, listening and working with a variety of foundations across the country, it was clear again that it's not that Dasra, or in this case, Give India and Dasra, have the answers. It's a question of the more individuals and the more families we start working with, it's honestly your experiences that we will be able to share with others. Because in philanthropy, there is no right answer. And I think that's really the critical piece. And I think all we can do, and we did this when we started Dasra and for our first decade and even now, just really giving examples to nonprofit organization leaders on what 5 other leaders have done. Not at all being prescriptive and saying this is the answer, but this is what 5 people have done. These are their learnings. Many times having groups, for example, like Nas Foundation and Kalyani, as she suggested, speaking to other NGO leaders and saying these are mistakes we made. I'm not saying that you're in the same boat, but at least you should learn from us. And I think with family giving in general, and I think we're seeing this more and more in this country, there is that need to sort of share and work with each other. And it's not about, again, the right answer. It's about saying this is what 5 other people have done in the past. And if you're open to meeting with those individuals, we would be happy to facilitate those gatherings. And that's, for us, I guess, is really what we learned from the Giving Circle members in this room and those that are out across the world. Having the conversations that we have had with all of you in terms of learning about best practices, sharing different perspectives. I mean, 9 times out of 10, the Giving Circle member says originally they came in thinking that they would actually just be a multiplier effect to their capital, and they left thinking actually there's a community of givers that they have now to rely upon to as a sounding board, because philanthropy also can be very daunting. And very lonely. And I think that's really what we're trying to create here. And we realize having a singular focus on families will allow us to reach that impact and scale faster. That being said, affiliating with the various other DUSRA programs that we offer. I mean, if you look on the stage and if you see those logos up there, having insights from each of one of those groups, depending on you as a family, your focus area, and being able to then partner with others to ensure that that focus area actually gets the recognition, support, and talent that it requires. As Rohini said earlier, it takes more than just individual giving. And so for us, we are starting with the family, but it's really our network of phenomenal foundations, givers, organizations that we hope all of you can start leveraging. So the DUSRA family goes beyond these rooms, but actually goes much, much larger than that. I know at the lunch break, many of you guys went up to Mrs. Surla Parekh, who asked the question before, which is a fantastic question. And she probably didn't tell you, in the 1970s, she actually brought John Hopkins together with USAID to build a hospital in an area where Gandhiji used to be operating. This is somebody who in the 1970s realized while she had her own capital to give, she wanted to partner with others to make significant change and impact. And that's what we hope will start coming out of these collaborations. And the only thing we ask from you guys is honestly to start talking about them. This is not about how much you give. This is about how you can be more effective in your giving. And that's an issue that we see day in and day out in this country, thinking, oh, philanthropy is private and we don't want to brag about it. But 800 million lives are at stake, so I don't want you to brag. I want you to share your learnings and your insights and help others join in that journey. And so when Amit and Archana Chandra talked about for the first time publicly how 100% of their annual wealth they give away, between 75 to 100% of their annual salary they give away year after year. They didn't do this to show anyone up. They showed this to be an example. When Anu Aga speaks publicly about how they give 30% of their family wealth away, these are the things we need to start talking about, because we need to be inspired by all of you in this room. And unfortunately, as Seema was saying with the Mint, the media covers all of the great stories, so many of you business leaders and business families already being looked at as role models because of the phenomenal work you guys do on the for-profit side. Unfortunately, because you don't talk to the media about your philanthropy, chances are those are the things that are not being highlighted. And so we have tens of millions of youth across the country wanting to be the next big company in X, Y, and Z, looking at you day in and day out. But if you don't start talking about philanthropy, those same values that your parents brought or your family brought to you won't be brought to this next generation. And so for us, it's talking about this more, sharing these insights, and really including your entire family in this journey, because that's the only way it will be sustainable. So with that, I'd love to open it up for any questions. We have about 10 minutes.
To be clear, Deval has moved into his Give India role already.
Is that self-explanatory? Yes. Ajit, of course, has a question. Go ahead, Ajit. I'm sorry, there's a question on this side? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Siddharth from Delhi. And my question is that if someone in their mid 20s has inherited a certain amount of money and they expect to grow that money significantly in the future, but they also want to give, when should they plan their giving? Is it more sensible to start giving today or later, but a bigger sum?
I think at the end of the day, you got to solve for what's going to give you the greatest joy. And I think often making completely unidimensional choices doesn't often, give folks a lot of joy. You need to have a little bit of variety in life. And therefore, I personally at least subscribe to the view that, you grow up with a lot of folks, including sometimes your parents telling you that your first, third of your life is learning, your next third is earning, and the last third is giving. And I don't particularly like that. I think you need to be a learner all through your life. You need to be a earner most of your life, and you need to be a giver most of your life as well. So I think, in my mind, this is a journey, and I think you'll become a better giver and you'll enjoy the journey more if you start experiencing that earlier. And so therefore, it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't do it, or, you only do one thing or the other. I think you can, one of the guys who inspired me and Archana to do what we do is someone called Chuck Feeney, who, before the Giving Pledge came up, basically embodied the Giving While Living movement. And I think you can actually give while you're building a company. You can start giving and learning and, increase that if you start getting a lot more joy out of it as you go along in life. So I would, at the end of the day, I would solve for what gives you maximum joy and satisfaction, but with the knowledge that these things are very tough. They're not like spigots that you can turn on and off. Giving is, to be good at giving, I think it's a lot tougher to be good at giving than it is to be good at building a company or building a career. I think the ecosystem doesn't exist and you need to solve for a weak ecosystem. And so it's best off, in my mind, starting early than starting late.
I would say that if you're in your 20s, you should start giving with time and start the habit early. And once you create more wealth, then that becomes a habit. Giving becomes a habit. You can start with giving with time, and then start giving with money and funding, and that will make you more strategic as the years roll by.
Hi, is it working? Hi. Giving is a whole new science in itself. If you go to the U.S., Charles Collier, Harvard Business School, wrote a whole book on it, and he said you get family meetings going. So what are the values the family has, and how do we execute? And you start the kids at a younger age, even at the age of 9 or 10. A little girl that stood up and said, "I get $5." $1 I put into giving somebody, etc. You're talking about a whole new ball game as compared to I've got a hungry child, how do I feed the child effectively, whether I do it through Anamrita, Akshay Patra. It's a heck of a swing here. Are you sure you can bridge this huge swing gap?
I think our experience with Dasra Giving Circles and Give India's experience of managing 65 families giving, which is a cumulative of 30 crores of annual contributions to the sector, demonstrates that it's about building alignment, honestly, and bringing people to the same page on what are we trying to impact. It's the same comments actually I made earlier. I think once you're able to help the giver identify and articulate their theory of change and where they want to create the greatest amount of impact, you will realize very quickly you're actually on the exact same page as the good social entrepreneurs you're funding, because they too have that same interest in mind. And so there's this false sort of perception, I would say, in the development sector that there's a buy side and a sell side. And I think thus our model in terms of taking the funder from cradle, which is helping them understand what they want to do, to grave, which is ensuring that not only that they support a few initiatives, but also providing those initiatives as well as the funder constant feedback on how to create greater value on society, and ensuring that both are flexible to see macro level of changes, which may be CSR today, maybe a government program tomorrow. I think as long as those communication networks are up, that's in essence what Dasra has been doing for the past 16 years. I think the leverage effect we see right now is that we've only been able to actually do it in a few sectors that we're really good at, and now we have this opportunity to, like somebody asked earlier, to work with groups like Drishti. So if a family comes to us and says they want to work with smaller to medium-sized organizations, we can say, oh, Smita's right there. If a family comes to us and says we want to do impact investing, we can say, you know, Vineet Rai and I lived in the same house in 2000, so why don't you speak to him and they can explain to you what the nuances are about investing in this space. If somebody wants to talk about free and independent journalism, Rohini Nilakani will become a mentor for them, talking about the initiative they've done with Azim Premji philanthropic initiatives. So I think what's the issue right now that I see in this country is that we have phenomenal solutions that have grown and scaled, that are written about at Stanford Social Innovation Review and HBR, but no one in this country recognizes or appreciates that. And so I think our role is to bring out not only those case studies, but honestly hundreds of organizations that have that knowledge that can support a much larger group of givers. And that's why we wrote this report on intermediaries with the Tata Trust this past year, is to build capacity of other intermediary groups so they can service large, impactful givers, whether they come from families, from corporates, or foundations. So I don't think it's a swing at all. I think it's the step in the right direction. And one of our colleagues, Arvind, is sitting in the back. In December, we do something called Dasra Day every quarter, where the full office comes together. And he was the one who actually brought this up, where he said, you know, you guys did the ecosystem with Dasra Girl Alliance, and now you have governance, and now you have sanitation with the Gates Foundation. What's the next big driver of Dasra? And for us, it's this. It's family giving in India and family giving globally. And we're very fortunate even today to have groups like Synergos in the room, Kate sitting on the same table as you, Kate, if you could just wave your hand, again, which was started by Peggy Dulaney. Or a group like the Philanthropy Workshop that brings global givers together and educates them on effective giving. And so we are partnering with leaders across the world and bringing that insight to India, realizing again that the amount of capital that's going to come into this sector, like I said, last year alone, 33,000 crores from 5 individuals. If that's 5 individuals, think about the potential right now that we have, but it's bringing those individuals to talk and share information where we think is the glue that's required.
So as Deval said, it's natural to this to be Dasra's 4th ecosystem. But if your question is about execution, you know, we have, I think, you know, Dasra today. I mean, first of all, it's a natural thing. It's natural to integrate the social enterprise lens that Dasra has with the giver, or the family lens, the giver's lens that Give India sort of does have in its core. The issue is execution, and believe you me, over the last 2 months we've talked a lot about that. And today Dasra is very well prepared. It's got a good management team that can allow Deval to free his time up to focus on this 4th ecosystem. And so I think Dasra, more than ever, is less dependent on Deval and Neera to really drive and run the organization. So there is capacity within, we believe that there is capacity within Dasra to get this done. But we'll report in a year's time.
Yeah, Ajit, I think both the situations you describe, I think, need to coexist. And the reason they coexist, I think, is, you know, everyone, as my wife often points out to me, are at different stages in their own evolution of their giving journey. And I don't think you can get to being a purposeful giver without actually having experienced being a casual giver, that, you know, and making relatively very simple choices. If you don't go through that, you will not experience, and you'll not question whether it's what's going right and what's going wrong. You will not eventually get to being a more purposeful giver. And so it is a journey that I think everyone needs to go through, and different people at different points in their journey. I mean, my wife and I send our daughter, very happily I might add, from her perspective, to volunteer in a municipal school with Akanksha every summer. And she's 10 years old, but I think, that's her giving her time. In our minds, it's more about, understanding social issues early on in her life. We see often, I think, the biggest givers I at least experience when I travel into rural India are actually our villagers. They're far bigger givers than our families and people in urban cities. And that giving, in my mind, may not be purposeful, but it's really preserves, I think, the character and the soul of the nation. And so in my mind, I think this is all in a way a journey that people need to go to. I think the important thing is those of us who are blessed with modest or large amounts of money and modest or large amounts of power have the opportunity to go through that journey and then be a lot more purposeful about it. Drive things at a very different level, and actually try to eliminate sticky problems, social problems that have existed for long periods of time, like the way Bill and Melinda Gates are trying to solve problems, the way Mr. Premji is trying to address education with a long 30, 40, 50-year vision. I think, but you can't get to that without actually experiencing the second. So in my mind, both have existed and will coexist for a long period of time.
Thank you, guys. Oh, one more question. Sorry.
Kalpana Parekh. Some more information about Family Philanthropy Education Program, please.
Yeah, so like I said, we launched this program last year, and really the goal was, as Amit was saying, it's a journey. And I think at Dasra many times, and many of us honestly in this space, take for granted the amount of exposure we have on a daily basis, hearing from givers as well as receivers and being in the field. And so for us, this program, it's going to be a 2-week program. It's going to start later in the fall, and it's really to get a group of different family members together from a variety of regions across the country to learn giving as a unit. This has been something that Dasra has actually been doing for many, many years. It was in 2005 for the first time. We took a group of family members from the US that were supporting an organization called the Global Fund for Children, and we brought their donors to India and did a roadshow with them, helping them see different organizations, helping them understand the nuances of social change, and helping them come up with their own theories of change on how to give more effectively. 2006, we did the exact same thing with the American Jewish World Service Organization. In 2009, we started the journey with the Philanthropy Workshop. The Philanthropy Workshop itself, which I mentioned earlier, is a partner of Dasra's, and it was started actually by the Rockefeller family in 1995, realizing that their own family members had to go through a journey to understand what's happening in this space to be able to give more effectively. And so in our experience of both bringing different groups together and forging collaboration and learning, as well as our interaction with global philanthropists for many, many years, we questioned, why aren't we doing this with local philanthropists? And that's really what's going to happen in the next year. Megha Jain, who runs our leadership programs for entrepreneurs, she's going to be running this effort with Industra with a larger team, and we'll definitely get back to anyone who's interested about this program, because I think it's about building that community of givers. And then honestly, we can take a step back and you guys will learn from each other, which is true empowerment when it comes to giving. So thank you guys all for listening. Thank you for being patient, and hopefully thank you for talking about this more to your friends and family, because we hope this can change the face of Indian giving as we see it today.